Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? Hopefully you had a good lunch. Cool. Enjoying the weather? Awesome. So my name's Leslie Richardson. I'm a product manager on the .NET tooling team at Microsoft. I also host the Visual Studio Toolbox show on YouTube and Twitch. It's under the Microsoft Visual Studio channel. But basically, I chat with my fellow colleagues and other Microsoft MVPs about cool stuff that people should be using in Visual Studio. So speaking of cool and speaking of Visual Studio, we're going to talk about what's next with VS, or really what I wanted to truly call this talk is what's new in VS 2026. At the time I submitted this talk, we hadn't announced it yet, so I couldn't say that outright, but that is what the majority of this talk is going to be about. So if you are using VS, which I'm assuming most of you in the room probably are, and you want to know about what's some of the latest, greatest features, improvements that we've made and are continuing to make with now VS 2026, and even where our general direction is going forward is, then you've come to the right talk. So we're going to talk all about it and also do some demos in between. And you're seeing all 5 feet of me right now. There's going to be a lot of stints where I'm behind the desk, and maybe you can only see half my head, but hi. Cool, so there's this survey, you might have heard of it, that is run by Stack Overflow every year. Chances are maybe you've either seen the results of it every year or you might have even participated in it. And as PMs, we love looking at this because it gives us a kind of overview of what are some of the most popular trends in the tech industry right now. So it's everything down from like what are the popular languages, what's the popular topics, and in our case, popular developer environments. And for like the 4th year in a row, VS and VS Code have continued to top the charts in that survey. If you've been following recent announcements that came from Microsoft Build back in May, and even earlier that, back in February, we announced that we hit over 50 million active users within both VS and VS Code, and 10 million of those are for VS. So that's a lot of people, and that was back in February, so it's probably even higher now. So to quote Uncle Ben, with great power, great popularity comes great responsibility. So on our team, the biggest challenge now and always is how do we continue to increase that adoption within the Visual Studio space? And also for those of you currently using VS, how do we continue to address some of the frustrations and pain points that you might be experiencing and make it so that Visual Studio continues to be an IDE that you keep coming back to? So introducing VS 2026. And specifically Insiders 1, which is out today. Show of hands, anyone using it yet? Okay, a couple of you, cool. So if you want to try it out, it's in the wild. You can give it a try today. If you're waiting for general release, I'm technically not allowed to give an official date, but just, it's coming soon, sooner than you think. Wink, wink. And you'll notice we called it Insiders this time, not Preview 1, it's Insiders 1. Why is that? Why are we using Insiders? A couple of reasons. I think the more obvious one is because it's more in parity with VS Code. VS Code calls their preview versions insider builds, so we're doing the same. The more markety reason behind it is because we wanted to choose a word that better emphasizes the improved collaboration loop that we want to have between ourselves, the Visual Studio.NET team, and you all, the people actually using VS, and like tightening that collaboration loop so that we can iterate faster and that you all are able to get the inside scoop on the latest, greatest features, being able to share your feedback, and us being able to address that feedback hopefully quicker going forward. Which leads me into, with VS 2026 comes monthly updates. So if you've been using Visual Studio for a while, usually in order to see like a lot of those big features come into play, you have to wait until a big release time like Build or Ignite, .NET Conf, all of those. And that takes a lot of time, right? I mean, chances are you filed a feature request on the developer community like back in February, and you might not see that thing come into fruition until year later in some cases. So with the monthly update, we want to be able to start to address feedback faster and also iterate on the features that we present within the Insiders build faster. So whatever ends up in the Insiders build is going to end up in GA or general release the next month. So anything you're seeing in Insiders 1 right now should make its way over to general release, and then a new set of preview features will make their way into Insider mode. And additionally, We, again, going on the enhancing the collaborative experience conversation, we also just want to be more upfront with you all about what we're even working on in the first place. So if you follow the Visual Studio blog, you might start to notice, including like right now, there's a lot of roadmap blog posts that are happening these days, especially in the AI space. So we're sharing with you a lot of just, here are the features that we're committed to, that we're currently like in transit on, and hopefully they will be out within X month. So stay tuned for a lot of that. We're just trying to be, again, more upfront so that you can share your feedback on things quicker, maybe even while we're still in design mode on some of these, and make it so that when it is available for you to try, it's in the best or a better form that it could be for you all. Which brings me to the core themes that we're tackling with VS 2026. Got 3 major ones. 2 of them are kind of the ones that are typically goals for us for any major Visual Studio release, but I think are still just as important now. First up is, of course, modern look and feel. If you have used Visual Studio before, there are 2 things that you might have noticed right away, hopefully. First being that it just looks pretty. I don't know, like it's hard to articulate why exactly it looks pretty because I'm not a designer, but there's just little things that have been included with the new Fluent UI design system that we're using that just overall help improve usability and accessibility. Things like cutting down the amount of space between margins or the padding between different displays, improving iconography. Like I think the highlights or the borders around windows are slightly bolder. That's something I've noticed. So play around, you might notice a little bit of a difference. And this, of course, is coupled with probably the most commonly asked for, one of the biggest pain points that all of us have, which is performance, and that is trying to make performance even better. So that should be hopefully the second thing that you notice from the moment you finish installing VS. You should be able to boot up VS. Hopefully you'll notice that maybe your solution comes up faster. You can open files and it will be a bit more responsive. You can hit F5, that process will be a lot faster. That was the goal. We've tried to take a lot of different performance slowness and speed it up. In many cases, we've taken actions that existed on UI processes before and moved them into background processes so that we can be more responsive and have better perf. And I think this, coupled with the modern look and feel, is hopefully what makes it feel like when you're in VS that it's a snappy experience. That's the word I like. The great Mads Christensen, who's like the knower of all things Visual Studio extensions, he uses the term lightweight for it. I get a little scared using the word lightweight because usually I associate that with VS Code, but that is at the very least the ideal direction that we want to head in, just trying to make the interactions that you have on a regular basis with Visual Studio feel lighter. And of course, we can't talk about the future without talking about AI, but not just specifically AI, but AI integrated development, emphasis on the integration part. I feel like for myself and many other people, some of the frustration that can be had with AI is that it can feel like we're creating a solution to a problem that doesn't necessarily exist. So what we're trying to do is take, in this case, GitHub Copilot and other AI functions and interweaving them into existing tools and features that you're probably already using in Visual Studio, and just making sure that it feels as organic of an experience as possible and is actually helping you be more productive in the way that you want to be. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because there's a lot going on, but this is all to say that we're also, of course, bringing the workloads that you're familiar with us into 2026 and beyond, and continuing to improve on them. I'm specifically going to speak to .NET 10 and C# 14 in a minute. I think John Galloway actually has a whole talk, I believe tomorrow, that's all about that, so you should definitely check that out if you want the deep dive. And of course, .NET Conf is coming out in a couple weeks. But .NET 10 and C# 14 are they're out of the gate, they're built into VS 2026, so you don't have to install anything extra. And we've also got updates to, of course, the C++ base, Aspire. There's been a lot of Aspire talks lately, and there's more updates happening in that space all the freaking time. So definitely keep up, take a look at that repo. It's open source, it's great, among other things. So taking the workloads with you. And all of this, of course, kind of accumulates together with the ultimate goal of creating an experience that is tailored for you, or giving you the opportunity to customize your development environment in a way that suits your personal needs and addresses a lot of your headaches. And on that note, we spent a lot of time, again, going through the developercommunity.com tickets and feedback that you share. So please continue to do so, because a lot of what you see in Visual Studio, both now and in the future, does not happen without your feedback. So please continue to get frustrated, but share the frustration politely. And in the past 12 months, we've addressed a lot of stuff. So past 12 months, we've addressed over 4,400 issues and over 290 feature requests, and that's still counting. So approximately 18 issues are fixed a day, and approximately 1.2-ish features are fixed or addressed or added each new workday. So we're constantly looking at it. Real people do look at it, promise. And yeah, please continue to share that feedback. If you're curious, like, what are some of the features that were specifically stemming from feature requests, if you go into the release notes, which I'm going to be plugging a lot, there are little megaphone icons next to certain features, and there's a lot, especially in this latest Insiders release, and that indicates one that stemmed directly from a user request. So thank your fellow community members, and give yourselves a pat on the back if you're that person who gave that particular feature request. All right, so going back to performance, everyone's favorite, I've got a nice little side-by-side video here. The left side of the screen is VS 2022. The right side of the screen is VS 2026. And in this case, we're F5ing an ASP.NET Core web app. So just to give you a sense of how much faster it is to boot that up, here you go. And that's it. So that's real time. We didn't fast forward any of that. Yeah, as you can see, 2026, significantly faster. And that coupled with .NET 10, ideally, you can see startup times as up to 30% faster, ideally. And that is still counting. We're still always improving performance. That's like a big deal. Okay. Again, I'm a PM. I like quotes and verbatim. So we shared the earliest bits of 2026 with some Microsoft MVPs, and they shared a bunch of quotes. I think a lot of them revolved, again, around the big ticket items like responsiveness, the fact that it looks nice, those coupled together just making it feel a lot snappier, and having those perf games, which are obviously going to be important to everybody. You spend so much time in Visual Studio, those little seconds that take up time when opening a new window or booting up your app, those really add up after hour number 6 at 2 a.m., so trying to mitigate some of that. Again, the fact that it looks nice, here's a good example. Some of the margin space has been deleted, and I know it might not seem like a big thing, but those little changes just help streamline the experience and keep you focused on what you actually want to be focused on for hours on end, which is your code. Can't talk about UI stuff without talking about themes. My personal favorite, I could spend like hours in the Visual Studio Marketplace looking at custom themes, but with VS 2026, you have a lot more built-in themes to choose from if you just don't want to do that browsing. So the image here, those are all of the built-in themes that you can take advantage of. You can even mix and match if you want. So if you want your editor space to be dark mode and the rest of it to be light mode, there is an option in the settings that enables you to do that now too, which is cool. Speaking of settings, there's a new settings window. So you might have seen this in VS 2022. That's where we introduced it, and we're still building on top of it. But ideally, this new experience is meant to be less intrusive. It's now a tab like most other things in Visual Studio. It's not this jarring dialog window for most of the most common settings. And any of your settings that you have in VS 2022 should carry over into 2026. We aren't backtracking, so the reverse doesn't work just because we want to head forward. So if you're, for whatever reason, having to go back to VS 2022 and you want your 2026 settings, sorry, that's not going to happen. But hopefully for all successive VS versions, that shouldn't be an issue. They should just sync alongside you. And speaking of syncing, you can choose where your settings go now. I highlighted with this box up top in this image a bunch of new filter options that you have. So including the ability to apply settings to either your entire user profile or to an individual repository. So if you've got specific settings that you want just for one repository, you can do that now. You can even edit the user settings via a JSON file, which is really great, especially if you use VS Code. You might be used to that kind of experience already. You can commit that file if you want to for your repository and have like a very specific settings-based experience for that particular project. And also, you can filter settings, too. So if you only care about performance-related settings or accessibility ones or whatever other modified kinds of settings you care about, there is a filter option as well. Another similar window is the extensions window. So show of hands, who's ever been frustrated trying to browse extensions in Visual Studio before? Anybody? OK, cool. Well, I have. And I think the reason why that is because previous versions of VS like to truncate a lot of the information about those extensions. So you can't see full summaries of what the extension does. You can't always see GIFs or images that the author put in to illustrate what the extension does. Really annoying. I don't want to have to bounce between my browser all the time in VS just to look at extensions. So we have recently updated the extension manager to act more like a traditional tab, to act more like the extension manager in VS Code. So now you get all of that crucial information about an extension that you want. Specifically new to VS 2026 with extensions is that if you've ever wanted to wait to go to the latest major release of Visual Studio because your extensions that you use on a day-to-day are not being supported in that new version yet, you can rejoice because most of the big extensions should just work in VS 2026. So if you've got some 2022 extensions that are integral to your developer environment and the author hasn't fully updated it yet for 2026, give it a try in 2026 because it might just work. There's a little tag in the extension manager now that lets you know if it's still VS 2022 supported. But other than that, most of your extensions should carry on with you without having to wait for extension author to do that migration work. I got to say, I was actually on the extensions team back when we were migrating from 2019 to 2022, aka when we were introducing 64-bit, and that introduced a whole new set of challenges for authors to have to consider when migrating, which resulted in a lot slower of a migration time. So the fact that this leap, in this case, all the extensions should just work for the most part without a lot of heavy migration needs is very exciting. Now let's talk a little bit about .NET 10, C# 14. This is kind of the short version because there's a whole talk about this later. But long story short, it is now baked into VS 2026. So stuff like the compiler, IntelliSense, syntax highlighting, error detection, all of that should just work if you plan on targeting .NET 10 in your future projects. Of course, performance is being improved overall in multiple different areas, including good old hot reload. Show of hands, who's ever been frustrated with hot reload? Yeah, me too. So fun fact, we have a general satisfaction survey that we send out to many of you on Visual Studio. You might have seen it take the form of like a gold bar survey at the top of your editor window. And one of the most common frustrations that we see from there all the time, never fails on a Monday morning when I look at those, is hot reload being inconsistent or slow or all the above or just not doing what you expect it to do. And while I can't say it's fully improved overnight, we are introducing features to it that hopefully are actually noticeable this time around. So one of the additions includes the reduction of root edits. That's just a fancy way of saying edits that require a rebuild or a restart if you try to hit the hot reload button. And we've introduced some new scenarios that originally required a restart that no longer do, such as the ability to rename a file or edit code that contains lambdas with default parameter values. And we've also, in general, improved the performance and reliability specifically for Razor files. I find that that's where I personally have the biggest frustration with hot reload, where I am just trying to make a really minor change, like just changing some text that's displayed in the front end, and it takes like 10, 20 seconds sometimes to see that change get updated. Not fun. Those seconds add up. So we've definitely tried to reduce a lot of those perf hits in that space. So if you're a Blazor developer, try it out. And we'll talk more about that in a sec. Additionally, we've introduced the ability to auto restart on those root edits, those edits requiring a rebuild or restart. And how that works is part of why it might take so long to do a hot reload action is because when one requires a rebuild, originally we're rebuilding the entire solution. Depending on the size of your project, I mean, that's huge. So if, for example, maybe you have a .NET Aspire app, it's got a front end, back end, you're making a change that's only specific to the front end. When you apply hot reload, it should only take that front end process into account and rebuild that one, or just specifically focus on that one instead of everything else that it might be attached to. And going into Razor, to start with performance, the reason why you might see a bunch of performance changes as it relates to the Razor experience and Razor files, Blazor files, is because of this new thing we introduced called co-hosting. Basically, we've taken the Razor compiler and the Razor tooling, and we've run them now co-hosted inside the Roslyn LSP server. And we're just mainly shortening the gap of communication required for all of those to interact with each other, therefore saving some time when we're doing things such as performing a hot reload action or doing other editing-based activities within Razor files, or even seeing things like your syntax highlighting pop up a little bit faster. So if you want to turn that on, it is off by default in Insider 1. Insiders 2 is going to have it turned on by default. But you can go into Tools Options and search for co-host, and you can enable Use Roslyn Co-host Server, and that should hopefully let you see some noticeable performance improvements. Also in the Razor space, we've made it so that formatting styles are being considered a lot more often. Sometimes that's been inconsistent historically. We're also providing more consistent tooltips. That's a pain point I personally had a lot of times, and a whole lot more. So play around with Razor if you're a Blazor developer. And last but not least, who currently needs an application that desperately needs to be migrated? Anyone? Whoa, nobody. Well, maybe some of your colleagues do, and historically it takes a long time to do, depending on the size and how old that particular application is. And that's why we've introduced the Copilot app modernization agent, which is aiming to, if not fully modernize your project in one pass, then at least shave off a massive amount of time for you to get started with that modernization process. And that is constantly being updated. I keep checking the release notes, and I'm always seeing new additions being added to that. So definitely take a look in the event you, in the future, need something that needs to be migrated to the latest versions of .NET. Okay, so going back to the co-hosting topic, and specifically hot reload as it relates to Razor files, got another side-by-side video. The screen on the left is VS 2026 with co-hosting disabled, and it's enabled on the right side of the screen in VS 2026. And in this case, we're just going to remove the change text. So you always wanted dash change should just turn into you always wanted. So I'm going to hit play. See how long this takes to do. Making our change, we're hitting hot reload. There we go, that's it. And the side on the left, that might seem relatable to some of you. It certainly is to me. Could be added just for a tiny little change like text, so yeah. Like, it's so long, I'm not even gonna finish the video. Cool, so of course, GitHub Copilot, everyone's favorite. I wanted to specifically highlight a couple things that are more under the hood that I'm not going to demo in full today, but are still worth sharing. First off, you've heard of BYOB, but now we've got BYOM, which is bring your own model. So if you've got a custom model that you've made, or maybe you have an API key for something that's not included by default in Visual Studio's Copilot chat, then there is a setting that lets you enter those keys, enter that information to get the model that you want to have when you're using Visual Studio Chat. Additionally, we've improved a lot of the context for GitHub Copilot. I know GitHub Copilot sometimes, or LLMs in general, they like to hallucinate, so providing that additional context is always a good thing. Some of the additions include the ability for Copilot to better recognize URLs, improved code search, external symbol awareness, better line number accuracy. That one's my personal favorite. I swear, I feel like anytime I use an LLM and I use numbers, I get so nervous because for whatever reason, LLMs just don't like numbers. And finally, it will actually be like, oh, you mean like the line numbers in your code. Let me look at that. And as I mentioned earlier with the modernization agent, there's a lot more built-in agents with 2026 as well. So I mentioned the modernization one, but there's also the debugger one and the profiler one, which I'm about to demo in a second. And again, talking about the future, I think the ideal direction where we'd like things to go with all of these agents is, like right now, you have to do a lot of invoking yourself. You have to explain, in a lot of cases, like what exactly you want it to do. Would be nice if there was more of that agent-to-agent based communication that was happening behind the scenes as you're working on something else that's more important in Visual Studio, and then periodically those agents could come and report back to you. And so just mentioning it because it's on the brainstorm table at work right now. So, okay, so debugger agent, first up. I'm a huge debugger nerd. If you follow me at all, you know I like to talk about the debugger stuff. And sometimes with the debugger tools is that there's a lot of them. They're not always discoverable. If you want to know about some of them, I'm going to talk about them in my productivity talk tomorrow. But yeah, it can be hard to know when and how to use them, and then especially figure out insights or takeaways after you use those tools. And that's when you can use the debugger agent. Right now, the debugger agent is applicable for debugging unit tests, but that is going to expand in later releases with even more functionality. But in this case, the debugger agent is going to hit F5 and modify your code, iterate on that code on your behalf completely, and it's going to also, in this case, take advantage of the Test Explorer, and read out some of those results and develop additional insights from there. So, as an example, here's a test. It's currently failing. You can opt to right-click it and debug with Copilot now, which is going to call the agent. And when it does that, it's going to develop a hypothesis, talk about what it's going to do to try and validate that hypothesis, and then run your code, debug, do the traditional debugging thing, run the test in this case again, so it's interacting with the Test Explorer. It knows that tool exists. And in this case, it failed again, so it will go and reiterate, revise its hypothesis, and try to give another proposed fix. Make those edits, run the debugger again. And there it goes. And then once it passes, it'll give you a result and a full summary of what it just did and why it did it. So great, quick way to be able to get some of those additional insights on what's going wrong with your code. You can work along. The idea is like being able to work alongside it in order to address some issues that you're having trouble figuring out what's wrong with it. Okay. Next one is about profiling. So I especially wanted to highlight the performance profiler for a minute. Has anyone used that tool in Visual Studio? Cool, one person, awesome. It is a really cool tool that nobody uses, or not a lot of people use, unfortunately, and I can understand why a little bit. But this is a great hub for being able to identify performance and profiling opportunities or ways to optimize your code. And what it does is you can select the kind of tool or kind of profiling you want to do, such as CPU usage, memory usage, database calls, how long are those taking, and Visual Studio will run your application, introduce some instrumentation, and then measure those particular values and give you this lovely little dashboard of a bunch of different information, including hot paths or just areas of opportunity where things can be better optimized. However, if you are not necessarily well-versed in profiling, this can kind of be a lot. There's a lot going on. It can be hard to know sometimes what's next? What do you do once you have all that information? Like, I know I need to hone in on something in particular, but what can I actually do to fix that problem? And that is where the profiler agent comes into play, because it will take advantage of that tool on your behalf and run it, do all the stuff that normally you might do manually if you're interacting with that tool, and also give those additional insights on how to optimize from there. So in this example, we're calling the profiler, and specifically, we're going to ask it how to optimize the code that Adler32 large update is calling. And when we do that, profiler is going to create a couple benchmarks and measure the elapsed time it takes to make that method call. It's going to give us the results. It tells us approximately how long it took to process that very large data buffer, and it also will tell us similar information that we see in the dashboard, like hot path or area of opportunity, probably going to be this update method that's taking up 98% of CPU time. So that's probably a good place to go. And what's good about this is that it's not leaving you completely in the dark. It's telling you what's up, and it's asking you, would you like me to proceed with the optimization from there? Like, if all you needed is just those first 2 lines of information, then you can go and do your own thing from there. But if you want to take it a step further and tell the agent to do some extra work, you can, and it will go ahead and make a change that hopefully goes and optimizes that particular method. So it's going to do that. It's going to run the profiler again. There are the profiling tools coming up on the side there. And now it's saying how much lower the execution time is. So it's giving you the change and letting you know what it did. So great way to take advantage of profiling without necessarily needing to be an expert on all things profiling. And now I've talked in slides a lot, so now you get to see half of my face because I'm going to do some live demos. So let's check out some other features. OK, so welcome to VS 2026. This is my, oh, it's not popping up. That's not good. Yeah, that's definitely VS 2026. As you can see, it's completely redone. Let's see if I can, if I change my display settings, that'll fix it. 1 second. Is that gonna work? Maybe? Yay, okay, cool. Awesome. Welcome to VS 2026, for real. So this is my midnight blue theme that I picked out. This is one of the default themes. I quite like this one. And we're going to do some testing in this example. So I've got a .NET Aspire app called Tiny Shop. I actually stole this one from James Montemagno. I don't know if he's in the room right now. Oh, yeah, he is. Thank you. So I forked from his repo and added my own stuff to it. But it's basically a smaller version of the eShop app that you've probably seen in a lot of different demos. And I've introduced some tests to it, and I want to inspect all the different tests that I'm doing. In my case, I've actually already introduced an issue to add additional comprehensive unit tests for this application. I did this with the help of the GitHub MCP server, which I will talk about in just a few. Fun facts. You can use it to file issues on your behalf. And it gets really detailed, too. Check this out. And specifically, there is a success criteria noted in here about having test coverage of at least 80% on business logic. So if you're writing tests are important, of course. You're just double-checking to see that different areas of your code are working. But sometimes it's hard to know how much of your application as a whole is being addressed by those tests that you created. So show of hands, has anyone heard of code coverage? Anyone using it? All right, cool, a couple of you. Awesome. So this is a feature that was exclusive in VS 2026, but we've now introduced it to everybody. So whether you're using Pro, Community, or Enterprise, you can use this cool tool now. And it's kind of exactly what it sounds like, but it is a feature that enables you to measure how much of your application is being exercised or covered by a particular set of tests that you have. And we're going to do that right now. And what's great about code coverage is a number of things. Again, it's giving you the full scale of, is your application being tested in the way that it needs to be across the board? Are method calls happening in the way you expect them to? Are edge cases happening in the way that they should? Are actual lines of code being addressed? Ultimately, it can also help address bugs before they happen. Chances are you want to put your app out into production, may not notice something right away while you're developing locally, but that little issue can balloon very quickly. And so yeah, it's just keeping all your bases covered, if you will, and letting you know the areas of opportunity to fill in the gaps that your test may not be covering yet. So we're going to go to test. Actually, first off, I'm going to swap over to my test workflow. Fun fact, a little teaser for my productivity talk. Did you know you can save your window layouts? You can choose to expand out whatever windows that you want open for a given scenario, and you can save them, and then go to apply window layout. I want my testing set up, so there we go. So now I've got the Testing Explorer open. I've got some tests, and we're going to select Analyze Code Coverage for all tests. So what that's going to do is it's going to build my application, it's going to run all my tests, and then it's going to generate some code coverage results in this window down below here, which I'll expand a little bit more so people can see it. All right. So once that happens, I get a list of all my DLLs and all the various areas that are being covered. So I can view the information via blocks. I prefer lines, personally. I can see what's being fully covered, not covered, partially covered. I can expand each of these out and get a drilled down version of this information. However, I think the real kicker, I'm a visual person, so I really like this button right here that toggles on code coverage coloring. And sorry about these colors. I know they're quite in your face. I changed the colors and settings so you can change them too, but it's really easy to see. But the green in this case represents the code that is being addressed by a test, and the red is stuff that is not. So just a really easy way to see where are some areas that can have more tests involved. However, this is not my favorite way to view this information, actually. You do have the ability to import additional code coverage results. You can merge additional results that you might have. But of course, you can export them as well. And you can export them to almost anywhere. If you've got a CI/CD environment set up, you can have them exported to GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps, your custom dashboard, what have you. There's also another cool tool that I like called Report Generator. Here's the open source repo for it. And this gives me a nice readable view of that same information. So I already went ahead and exported that code coverage file. And when I run the right command in the command line, it will generate an HTML that I can open up and get more details. So here we go. So this is the same result that I just did, just in what I think is a more readable format. Specifically, I really like this new square up top that just tells me the percentage of line coverage that there is. Just a really quick way to see how much of my code is being addressed, in which case, nowhere near the 80%. I got a lot of work to do. But yeah, you can see all this. You can expand each of these items out. You can click on any of them and see some similar highlighting like you would with seeing the code coverage results within Visual Studio. So that's Report Generator, really cool. All right, so going back to VS, looks like I've got some tests that I need to generate. And I'm going to use Copilot to help me out with that, because otherwise we'd be here for a while. So specifically, let's tell it, I'm going to create a new thread, to write unit tests for #get products. Simple. I should just go ahead and hit enter right now. That's all I need, really. But in reality, I'm going to keep going. I believe in being as specific as possible with Copilot, because otherwise it can be allowed to go rogue and do something you did not expect it to do. So if you have a very specific scenario in mind, here's a couple additions that I think are worth adding. First off, I'm going to say use Microsoft, if I can spell it, Microsoft Learn Docs to get best practices on writing these tests in .NET 9. I haven't migrated this project to .NET 10 yet, so we're using .NET 9. But basically, the reason why I'm putting that, a couple reasons. One, I mean, Copilot and every other LLM out there loves to feel incredibly confident about itself. It's just confident all the time. I admire that, but I don't always trust it. So I want it to actually go look up additional docs so that you can just validate that what you're doing is the right way to go or the best up-to-date way to go ahead and write these tests. And also because I am using an MCP server, which I can view via this wrench icon below there called Microsoft Docs, something like that. Let me see. Microsoft.docs.mcp. Now, unfortunately, I don't have time to go into MCP all up. Hopefully, some of you went to James Mont's awesome MCP talk that was like right before mine. But for the context of this particular demo, let's say the MCP server, or the Model Context Protocol, is a setup that enables the LLM, in this case we're using Copilot and we're using Claude Sonnet, to access external data and communicate with those external data-based resources. So in this case, I'm using a Microsoft Docs MCP because that's going to enable Copilot to go extract some of that external information related to Microsoft Learn Docs and use that information as a base for generating these tests. Additionally, prompts in general, I mean, they're becoming increasingly more valuable and more important, especially once you find that unicorn prompt that just works for exactly what you're trying to do. You want to hold on to that. And that's why reusable prompts are so important. So Visual Studio has introduced the ability to save prompts that are near and dear to your heart. I've already got some checked out. I'll go into it more in a minute. But you can click on the plus icon and then select prompts, workspace prompts. I've got two, but I'm specifically going to choose the one called C# XUnit Best Practices, because most of my tests are already written in XUnit anyway. And let's go ahead and run that, and hopefully Copilot will start to do its thing. Now to start, okay, yeah, so it's going to say what it's going to do. It's going to consult MS Learn Docs. When it does that, in this case, I'm using this server for the first time in this session, so it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to use this like external server just as a security function? If I'm feeling really confident, I could just say always allow, which I'm going to do right now. But that's how you know, for the most part, that your MCP server has been invoked properly in the context of Copilot. It's going to go ahead and do that. And if you're wondering, how do you even get these MCP servers? Where can you go? GitHub actually introduced a new registry called the GitHub MCP registry. And this kind of functions like your Visual Studio Marketplace or Extensions Marketplace, where you can browse a bunch of different servers that you can add. I'm going to talk about the GitHub one in just a few minutes. And you can install them via usually an mcp.json file. And that is something that if you were to install by default for VS, it's going to be added into an mcp.json file that is global to the Visual Studio experience. However, if you want it for a very specific repository or project, you can create a JSON file for that particular project if you want that narrowed down experience. All of this is going to be integrated into Visual Studio, similar to the extension manager, so stay tuned for that. That should pop up in a future update. Okay, let's see what we're doing here. It's doing the test. While it's still doing that, I also want to talk about prompts. So I just used a prompt called like C# XUnit test prompts. I didn't make that myself, fun fact, because I actually went to this great repo that you should totally save called awesome-copilot. So this is a repository that has, let me click on the home page here so you can see what it actually looks like. So this is a repo that has a lot of community-made prompts, instructions, chat modes, all these other things that have been proven to have worked for other people, and you can, in a lot of cases, just copy and paste those contents that usually take the form of a markdown file into wherever you want to add this information into. I love this a lot. It saves me the trouble of having to write these long prompts that do exactly what I want them to do. So specifically going back to XUnit best practices, here's an example. It's a markdown file, so what you'd want to do is copy-paste the raw version of this. I put it in a new file, and specifically you want to use prompt.md as your file extension and save that under your .github folder in your repository. So that's the same location where you'd put Copilot-instructions or other instructions files as well, and that will help Copilot pick up all that information, and it'll also pick up in Visual Studio proper when I go to the prompts dropdown. That said, fun fact, because I can't go a talk without plugging it, if you want the ultimate prompt, my favorite prompt in the world that doesn't require me to constantly be thinking about scenarios because this particular prompt just works 9 out of 10 times for what I'm trying to do, I highly recommend one. It's technically under chat modes right now called Beast Mode. Here we go. Yeah, so this is one called Beast Mode. Right now, if you're using VS Code, it's very easy to introduce a new chat mode, and that's always going to be listened to as long as you keep that toggled on. In VS, we don't have that yet. It's coming, but for now, you can just treat this as a prompt and copy-paste the same way you would with other prompt.md files. But I love this one a lot because, long story short, we are telling the LLM to be like, hey, I know you're super confident, but you do not know everything. Like, I know you think you know everything, but you don't. So before you give me a response, look up things online and actually reference that stuff online and tell me what you're going to do. Give me an actionable task list of all the different actions that you're going to perform, and then give me like the full detailed breakdown of everything that you did, all the items on that task list that were accomplished, and we can move on in our merry way and still be friends. So specifically, we have in all caps here even, this problem cannot be solved without extensive internet research. So like, do not pass go, do not collect $200, internet research. It's like the same thing you tell kids in school, like if you're not citing your sources, then I don't want it. All right, so coming back to it, it looks like Copilot completed all of my tests. It's nice, I got a lovely little summary of everything it did. It introduced some data-driven tests, technical verification, error scenarios. I can click on any of these, and it will direct me to where it was added. Yeah, and it's using asserts in the way I expect it to, fact attributes in the way I expect it to, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and accept these for now. Don't be me, like definitely review all this, but for the purposes of this demo, it's good. Let's do it. So now we're going to run code coverage again, and hopefully we'll see that gap that we had under Git products has been addressed. So again, running the test. And we'll do the highlighting method. There we go, all green. Exciting. All right, so made my changes, generated some tests, talked about reusable prompts, we talked about MCP server stuff. Now I think I'm good to go with actually committing these changes and starting to address that issue that I mentioned earlier. But I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I get a little nervous when I commit my changes for my whole team to see. I don't know if I made an accidental human error or something, or I get self-conscious about what it is that I actually did. So maybe you want like another review pass from a neutral party. That's where Copilot can help you out again. So if you go into Git changes, there is a little, I don't know, comic book blurb with stars in the corner, a little hard to see, but it will enable you to review changes with Copilot. I like that it does tell you up front it might be inaccurate, but you can get that additional review pass with Copilot's help before you make those changes. So you can do this, I believe, either before you stage your changes or after you stage your changes, doesn't matter when. But depending on how many changes you made, it might take a minute for Copilot to do its thing. So let's see if it's going to do it. OK, so in this case, I've got 3 review comments. I can click on those, and I'll be given some suggestions. So in this one, it's saying the test method name suggests it should return an empty list, but it actually expects an exception. So maybe I should change the name. So little things like that, just from a conventional, make it easier to read standpoint to, going to the next one. Parameter names, unclear, should be more descriptive, that sort of thing. So these are the kinds of comments that might be hard to get if you're just using like an analyzer or something to review some code. So Copilot in this case is trying to fill the role of like a peer and trying to just give you suggestions. You don't have to take them or leave them, and they may not always be correct, but it's just like that extra neutral third party who can give you suggestions before you make your commits. All right, so now that I'm feeling a little bit more confident, let's go ahead and make a PR. I can do this PR a couple of ways. Of course, I can go to GitHub. I can actually do it via Visual Studio now in my Git Changes window. But I'm going to use Copilot again because I like to use good old natural language sometimes. And also, sometimes, I don't know about y'all, but I'm allergic to the CLI. And I like to avoid it whenever possible sometimes. So this is one of those times. All right, so we talked about the Microsoft LearnDocs MCP server before. This time we're going to use the GitHub MCP server. And this one's really nice because it enables Copilot and the LLM to communicate with the external data source, in this case being your GitHub repository. When you first install this one, you can't just use it right away. You need to give it your like login access information, all that. But once you do that, you can have it do a lot of different things. You can ask it to summarize branches. Maybe you're new to a project and you just want a quick summary of what is happening in this branch, who submitted what. You can ask it all of that just in natural language via Copilot, and it could summarize that. You can ask it to create a README based off of the commits or the PRs that have been created so far, saving yourself the time of having to write up a full list of README updates or release notes. And in our example, we're going to use it to generate a PR. So let's say I'm going to say use the GitHub MCP server. I'm saying that because sometimes one of my pet peeves with MCP servers is that they don't always get invoked right away by Copilot, just depending on what the name of it is, what other tools you currently got installed. So just to be as clear as possible, sometimes I'd just like to straight up say, use the MCP server, do not go into the command line and perform this. So we're going to say, use that server to create a PR for this branch. And maybe as a bonus, let's say, link it to the related issue. Okay? So we're going to run that. Hopefully see Copilot do its thing. All right, so it's invoking the MCP server tool. In this case, it's running through a list of issues because I asked it to connect my PR to that. We're going to confirm. And it's going to search more broadly for some testing-related issues. All right, so it looks like it found the relevant issue, which is add comprehensive unit test. So now it's going to create a PR now that it has access to that corresponding issue. And pet peeve number 27, sometimes Copilot likes to pause as if it's frozen, but really it's thinking, and I really just wish we had like moving dots or whatever they're called to let me know that it's not broken or nothing. But here we go. So this case, another tool is being called. This one is open new pull request. Hit and confirm. Yeah, see, now it has the 3 dots. It's just not always consistent about it. Cool. So it looks like the PR has been created, and it's now adding a comment to the issue to link it successfully. I'm hoping this X isn't an ominous indicator of what I'm about to get, though. Okay, this one is adding a comment to issue. So yeah, as you can see, there's a tool for everything depending on the MCP server. In GitHub's case, there's one for pretty much any GitHub-related action you can think of. But here it looks like my PR has successfully been created and linked to the corresponding issue. It's giving me a summary of all that work that was done. And of course, I can click on the link to that PR. It's going to ask me if I want to go to the browser. And there we go. So it's giving all of the scenarios that we just did, all of the tests that we just generated, talking about in full detail what tests are covering what, quality metrics, 11 new tests have been added specifically for Git products. Here's a related issue that it links to, so I can go back to. I like that it says partial here, because I'm clearly not done. I've got some more work to do. I'm not at 80% code coverage yet, so I'm going to keep that issue open, but it is linked up. Also lists, of course, files changed, next steps. A lot of info that, let's be honest, many of us don't always add to our PRs sometimes, which I think is one of the pluses of utilizing Copilot and the GitHub MCP server or the Azure DevOps MCP server, because there is an MCP server for that, for needs like this, because it makes things very clear. It breaks it down so that your teammates aren't going to be like, what the heck did you add when they're looking at a PR that just has a header and then maybe one sentence? So saving everybody some time and making everyone feel a lot more productive and in the know on what's going on. Cool. So that concludes all of my live demos. So in summary, there's a lot of features introduced as of 2026 or improved upon as of 2026. Going back to my slides. So now the question becomes, of course, what's next? We're talking about the future. So if you want to stay up to date on all these updates, which are going to be happening a lot more frequently now that we're doing the monthly releases, 3 major spots that I think are worth checking out. First is the VS release notes, or the What's New tab in VS. Actually, I like What's New the best because it's, again, in VS and I don't have to leave it. So if you don't know where that is, open up feature search, type in What's New, and this gives you an inline experience of basically the release notes with all of the latest, greatest updates and things that you should definitely play around with. All right. I also like the VS blog. That's also where we're going to be posting a lot of our roadmap information going forward. And last but certainly not least, as I've said a bajillion times in this talk, the developer community is your best friend. Seriously, a lot of the tools and features that we introduce and fix and stuff do not happen without your continuous feedback and putting all of that in the developer community. Fun fact, though, obviously we get a lot of issues and we need to prioritize. So if you do plan on giving a feature request, or especially a feature request, tell all your friends and coworkers who might be interested and tell them to upvote it, because votes are in a lot of cases what helps us prioritize. That said, if you want the best place to submit a feature request or a bug, highly recommend doing it through Visual Studio itself. You can do that by going to Help and Send Feedback, and you can choose to report a problem or suggest a feature. So when you do that, you automatically get redirected to the developercommunity.com site. The difference being is that it also brings along some of your system information with that click, which saves us all some time. For you, it saves you the time of having to follow up with us if we need additional information about like what build you're using and things like that. And for us, it saves us, again, the time of having to reach out to you, and we can get that much quicker when it comes to addressing your problem or your feature request. So highly recommend doing it through Visual Studio itself. And with that, I talked about a lot of stuff, so if you want to have access to what I think are some important links and stuff, scan this QR code or go to urllist.com/vsproductivity. It's got, basically it is a hub that contains a list of related links, including links to the release notes, the blog, both the VS one and the .NET one, the VS YouTube channel. Shameless plug, check out my Visual Studio Toolbox show if you want specifically deep dives on Visual Studio content. There's also a lot of shorter videos in that same channel as well. Access to the demo repo. I'm really bad at being on social media these days, but Visual Studio isn't, so be sure to follow Visual Studio if you're not already. And finally, last but not least, again, developer community. So with that, another shameless plug. If you like this talk and I didn't scare you away and you want to know more about just general productivity tips and tricks, both within VS 2026 and earlier, I am having a productivity talk tomorrow at 3 p.m. So be there, be square. And that's going to be mostly demo heavy, so we're going to rock and roll together and pray that nothing breaks and the demo gods are in our favor. And with that, thank you so much for coming to my talk. I hope you're all excited to try out 2026. Please share your feedback, and happy coding, y'all. Thanks.